So after considering discrete probability distributions, we are now ready to move to distributions or probability distributions that are considered continuous. Okay. So here's what is amusing about continuous random variables. Okay. A continuous random variable has a probability of 0 of assuming exactly any of its values. Okay? Kung meron kayong continuous random variable, okay, don't expect that or the probability that your continuous random variable would be equal, okay, to one of its values, okay, is impossible. Okay? So in that case, we cannot express the probability distribution of a continuous random variable in tabular form. Okay? So that again, that would be odd and amusing. Okay? But it would become more plausible when we consider a particular example. Okay? So let us discuss a random variable whose values are the heights of all people over 21 years of age. Okay? So yun yung natin, no? Yun yung random variable natin. Okay, so say x means x represents a random variable or a variable that assumes the values of heights in centimeters, okay, of all people greater than 21 years old. Yan. So, yan yung representation ng random variable x natin. Okay. Now, if you consider any two values, okay, if you consider any two values, say 163.5 centimeter and 164.5 centimeter, or even a very small interval na 163.99 and 164.01 centimeters, okay, there would be an infinite number of heights. Okay, yun yung sinasabi ko before. Even if for a continuous variable, okay, for a continuous variable, even if maliit lang yung interval na pinag-uusapan natin, the values in between this interval are infinitely many. Okay, so yeah, in between this values, okay, so in between 163.99 and 164.01 centimeter, okay, there are an infinitely many values of heights here. Many values for x to assume here. Okay. Now, one of which is 164. So isa dun sa sa mga infinitely many values na yun would be the height 164 centimeter. Okay. Now, the probability of selecting a person at random, okay, who is exactly 164 centimeters tall and not one of the infinitely large set of heights so close to 164 centimeters that you cannot humanly measure is very remote. Okay? That is, mahirapan ka maghanap ng tao okay, na ang height ay eksaktong 164 centimeter at mapapatunayan mo na talagang ang height niya ay 164 centimeter. Okay? Hindi 163, for example. Pag sinabi mo ang height niya ay 164 centimeter, okay, hindi ito 163.5 5, for example. Okay? Or 160, hindi rin siya 163.95. Okay? Hindi rin siya 163 or 164.04, for example. Yung eksaktong 164 cm talaga. At mapapatunayan mo na siya ay eksaktong 164 cm. Okay? That is very impossible. Okay? That is very, very impossible to do. Okay? So, in that case, okay, since we will not be able to do that, or we will not be able to have a definitive proof, okay, that the person that we have selected has a height of 164 centimeters exactly, and not the range of values that would give you 164 centimeters as the nominal or reporting height. Okay? We will assign a probability of 0 for finding that exact or for your height, assuming the exact 164 centimeter. Okay? So, yung probability of the probabilities of on a continuous random variable is actually expressed or is actually depends on the range of the values it actually assumes. Okay, dahil nga hindi natin kayang hanapin yung yung probability nung eksaktong pag-assume nung random variable ninyo ng eksaktong value. Okay? So, if we are talking about say selecting a person who is at least 163 centimeters, okay, and not more than 165 centimeters tall, okay, so may interval tayo. So pagka ganun, mahanapan natin siya ng probability. Kasi marami tayong mailalagay na mga measurements dyan sa range na yan. Okay? But again, pag eksakto, the probability is 0. Okay? So in the case of a continuous random variable, okay? In the case of a continuous random variable, so for continuous random variable, we will deal with ranges of or intervals of values that it can assume. Okay? So interval or ranges yung pag-uusapan natin. That is in contrast with your discrete random variable. Okay? For discrete random variable, we have dealt with point values. Okay? That it can assume. So, the probability that your discrete random variable assumes a certain value, okay, is what we have presented in the previous lesson. Okay, while in this lesson, we will now emphasize the point that for continuous random variable, the probability that we will be looking for are specified in terms of ranges, okay, or intervals of values that your random variable can assume. Okay, so we shall concern ourselves with computing probabilities for various intervals of continuous random variables, such as the probability of x assuming values less than a, okay, greater than a and less than b. Okay, okay, the probability of your random variable w assuming a value that is greater than or equal to C, okay, and so on. Okay, so note that when X is continuous, okay, note that when X is continuous, okay, yung set na to, okay, that set of that set, your X assumes, or your X is greater than A and less than or equal to B. Okay? Yung set na yan, okay, the set X is greater than A and less than equal to B, okay, is equal to, okay, that set, okay, is equal to the set your X is greater than A and less than B, okay, union, okay, or united with union with your X equal to B. Okay? So, kumbaga pagkasamahin natin yung dalawang set na yan para mabuo tong set na to. Okay? So, in that case, the probability now that your X is less than A and greater than or equal to B. Okay? Galing dun sa ating previous lesson is equal to the probability. Since union to, no? I-add natin yung probabilities ngayon nila. Okay? That is the probability of A, your X, being greater than A, okay, and less than B, okay, plus the probability that your X is equal to B. Okay? So, nasa previous lesson na ito, additive rules for probabilities. Okay? So, ayun. Ito yun. So, the probability that your X is greater than A and less than B, okay, plus the probability that your X is equal to B. So, that equals, okay, but still, okay, still, again, ito kasi, tandaan natin, okay, pinag-usapan natin kanina lang, no, okay, that this probability is actually 0. Okay, is actually 0. Again, we cannot find, for a continuous variable, okay, we would not be able to find the probability that your X would assume an exact value. Okay, so therefore, this probability is 0. Okay, so therefore, it turns out that this probability, okay, yung probability na to, okay, this probability is actually equal to this probability. Okay, so, ano yung point? Okay, what is the point? Okay, so, again, no, this probability, okay, is equal to 0 since the probability of continuous random variable assuming an exact value is equal to 0. Okay? So, it turns out that the probability of A, the probability of X greater than A and less than equal to B is equal now to the probability of your X assuming values greater than A and less than B. Okay? So, ano yung gusto nating i-point dito? Okay? For continuous random variables, okay, it does not matter if the interval, okay, includes the endpoints. Okay? Kasama o hindi yung endpoints ng interval ninyo. Okay? The probability remains the same. Okay? So, as another example, yung probability, for example, that your W assumes a value that is greater than or equal to C. Okay? Again, yung set na W assuming yung set na W assuming a value that is greater than or equal to C. Okay? Equals the set of W assuming a value that is greater than C. Okay? Union with the set of W equal to C. Okay, so pagsasamahin natin yung dalawang sets na yan. Okay, and again, yung probabilities nila, okay, so yung probability of W assuming values greater than or equal to C, okay, is equal to the probability of your W assuming a value greater than C, okay, plus, again, kung yun, i-add natin yung probabilities. So, yung probability of W equal to C, which again, this expression, okay, equals 0. Okay, again, the probability of your continuous random variable assuming an exact value is 0. So, therefore, it doesn't matter kung kasama yung endpoint o hindi. Okay, pareho lang yung probability na kasama siya o hindi. Okay. Includes the endpoint. It doesn't matter if the interval includes the endpoints or not. Okay. Lagyan natin yun. The endpoints or not. So, there. So it does not matter whether we include an endpoint of the interval or not. Okay? So, when your random variable is discrete, that is not true. Okay? So, nakita natin yun sa discussion natin on probability distribution. Sa cumulative probability distribution. Okay? So, although the probability distribution of a continuous variable cannot be presented in tabular form, okay, we can instead state it as a formula. Okay? Now, such a formula would necessarily be a function, okay, of the numerical values of the continuous random variable, okay, and as such will be represented, okay, by the functional notation f of x. So ganun pa rin, katulad din sa sa previous lesson natin, the distribution of your variable or the probability distribution of your variable would be represented by a function, okay, of the values that your random variable would assume. Okay? So, say for example, if we have f of x, okay? So if we have f of x would represent the probability, okay, that your random variable x would assume, okay, a certain interval x. Say for example, like that. Okay? So, yun. Now, in dealing with continuous variables, okay, f of x is usually called the probability density function. Ito yung PDF. Okay? This is what we acronym as PDF. Okay? Or simply the density function. Okay? So, of x. So, ganito. Discrete, random, variable, x, okay? Yung f of x dyan, okay, is called the discrete kasi meron tayong continuous, so discrete probability distribution, okay, or probability mass function. So that's PMF. Okay? So those are the terms that we use for f of x for a discrete random variable x. While for a continuous random variable x, okay? This f of x now is called a continuous probability distribution. Okay, yan yung generic name niya. Or we can simply call this as the probability density function. Okay, or as PDF. Okay? So we emphasize these differences. Okay? Because when you study higher courses that uses probability theory in its theory or principles, gagamitin niyo yung mga terms na yan doon. Okay? So, yeah. So, since x is defined over a continuous sample space, okay, it is possible for f of x, okay, to have a finite number of discontinuities. Okay, so we will now allow your f of x to have discontinuities. Okay, well, in the case of discrete probability distribution, yung f of x talaga, meron namang discontinuities. Okay, meron naman talaga siyang discontinuities dahil nga discrete siya. Okay. But here, since your x is continuous, f of x must be mostly continuous. Okay. But it is allowed to have a finite number of discontinuities. Okay. However, most density functions that have practical applications in the analysis of statistical data are continuous. Okay. And their graphs, okay, may take any of the several forms, some of which are shown in this figure. Okay, so again, this is the graph of your this is x, okay, or the values that your random variable will assume. Okay, and this is the probability. Okay, this is the probability that a certain range of a variable, a certain range of values will be assumed by your random variable. Okay, so pwedeng ganito siya. Okay, pwedeng ganito, pwedeng ganito, pwedeng ganito. Okay, so because areas will be used to represent probabilities. So recall that in the previous discussion, we have emphasized that the area of the rectangle for your probability histogram, okay, must represent the probability. Okay, so again, for discrete random variable, okay, in probability histogram, the probability, okay, of your x, assuming a certain value x, should equal the area, okay, of the rectangle representing the probability. Okay, so in-emphasize natin yan. Dapat yung area ng rectangle ninyo is equal to the probability. This is because we would be using the same we would be interpreting yung ating continuous random continuous distribution, continuous probability distribution. Yung graphs nila, we would treat the area, okay? We would treat the area under that curve, okay? And bounded by a certain number. Say for example, ito. So bounded by a certain number, okay? Tapos bounded by the curve of the distribution. So itong area na to, okay? So that must represent also a certain probability. Okay, so that is why ima-mindset natin yung sarili natin that these areas actually represent probabilities. Okay? So, yun. So, areas will be used to represent probabilities. Okay? And probabilities are positive numerical values. Okay? We see that, or it would imply that the density function must lie entirely above the x-axis. So, since positive ang probability, okay, at positive probability means positive area, okay, so it means that the area that we are looking for should be above the x-axis. Okay. So, a probability density function is constructed so that the area under its curve, okay, the area under its curve, bounded by the x-axis, okay, is equal to 1, okay, when computed over the range of x for which f of x is defined. Okay? So, ibig sabihin, halimbawa ito siya, no? Or ito, halimbawa ito siya. Kung ito yung yung entire range of x, okay? Kung yan yung entire range of x natin, okay? So, that's your x. Tapos, yeah. Kung yan yung entire range of x, yung area bounded by the by the PDF, okay? Bounded by the PDF and the and the x-axis, okay? Which should dapat sakop niya hanggang dun sa dulo nung hanggang dun sa dulo nung allowable x sa kanya, which is supposedly negative infinity up to positive infinity. Okay, so yung entire area na yan, okay, pag kinuha natin yan or pag sinum up natin yan, dapat equal yan sa 1. Okay? So, the sum of these areas, okay, so parang ito rin. If this is the entire x, yan, ito yung entire x natin. From negative infinity up to positive infinity. Okay? The area under this curve. Okay? The area under this curve. Okay? Should equal to 1. Okay? Should equal to 1. So, dahil, that is because, since areas represent probabilities, okay? So, the entire probability or the entire area should equal to the fact that you are getting the probability of your random variable assuming all possible values of x. So in that case, yung probability na yun should be equal to 1. Yeah. So there. Now, should this range of x be a finite interval? Okay. So, say for example, hindi infinite yung interval nung x niyo. That is, meron lang siyang certain interval for which your x can assume. Okay. It is still, it is possible, okay, to extend the interval, okay, to still include the entire set of real numbers. Okay. And how do we do that? If we define x, f of x, the probability, okay, to be 0 at points, okay, at all points where that is outside, at all points that is outside your finite interval, okay, then we can go back to the specification na for the entire range of x, okay, yung probability niyo is still 1. Okay? Kasi kung ang f of x nyo dun sa interval for which the probability is 0, okay, and add it up dun sa probability, okay, or add it up dun sa probability that add them up dun sa probabilities that or dun sa f of x within the interval for which your x is defined, okay, or your x can assume a value, okay, then we can still add up all those probabilities to 1. Okay? So, may extend pa rin natin siya. Okay? So, how do we find now that probability? Okay? So, assuming that f of x, okay, is your probability distribution or PDF, okay? So, the probability that your random variable x assumes a value that is less than a and greater than b, that is greater than a and less than b, okay, is actually this area. At ang naaral natin about sa integral calculus natin is that to look for the area under the curve, okay, we use integral. Okay? So the definite integral of f of x dx from a to b, okay, so ito yun. Ito yung area na yun. Okay? That area, okay, is the probability that we are looking for. So this is the integral of f of x dx from a to b. Okay? So now we formally define the probability density function or PDF. Okay? So this is the PDF. Okay? The function f of x is the PDF for the continuous random variable x. Okay? In which that random variable x is defined over the set of real numbers. Okay? If all values of x is either 0 or positive for all x belonging to the set of real numbers. Okay? Next, the integral, okay, the integral of your f of x dx from negative infinity up to positive infinity is 1. Ito yung sinasabi natin na the area under the curve, okay, of f of x. So pag kinuha natin yung area under the curve of f of x for the entire range of x, okay, that should be equal to 1. Okay? And finally, yun na nga, the probability that your x assumes a value that is greater than a and less than b is the area under the under f of x, okay, which is found by this definite integral. Okay? So those are our definitions. So let's work on example 3.11. So suppose that the error in the reaction temperature in degrees Celsius for a controlled laboratory is a continuous random variable x. So error to ha. Okay, so the error is a continuous random variable. Okay, having the PDF, okay, which is x squared over 3 for x greater than negative 1 and less than 2. Okay? So, here we are asked to first verify that f of x is a density function. Okay? So, how do we verify that f of x is a density function? So, it should actually satisfy at least these two. Ito at saka to. Okay? Kasi itong pangatlo, this finds the probability for a certain range of x. Okay, so for you to know if a given PDF, okay, is a PDF, okay, or if a given function is a PDF, okay, you have to make sure that for all allowable values of x, okay, your f of x is either 0 or positive. Okay, it's either 0 or positive. Okay, and that the area under the curve bounded by the entire x-axis is equal to 1. Okay, so paano yung una? By inspection na lang to, no? Okay, so we see that even if your x assumes values that are negative, kasi may negative 1 dito so mag-assume yan ng negative values. But your x is dun sa f of x niyo, in-square naman siya. Okay, in-square naman siya. So therefore, if you square a negative number, it becomes positive. Okay? So therefore, whether your x is positive or negative, okay, whether your x is positive or negative, your f of x is either positive or 0. magsi-zero tong f of x nyo when x is equal to 0. Take note that again, this will not work, no? Okay, but it is possible that this probability, okay, is 0, okay, when your x is 0. Okay. Now, the second thing that we have to prove so that we can say that this f of x is a PDF is the second assertion of definition 3.6. So that is, we need to evaluate your f of x. Okay, so we need to evaluate your f of x. We need to evaluate the integral. Okay. So yung second requirement of definition 3.6 is that the integral of f of x dx from negative infinity up to positive infinity should be equal to 1. Okay. So in this case, since your f of x is non-zero for a finite range, or for a finite range of x, okay, and is 0 siya for all other for values of x that are outside that finite interval. Okay, yung integral natin, if we have to substitute f of x here, okay, that integral changes limits. Okay, so instead na from negative infinity to positive infinity yung magiging limit natin, okay, we will consider your f of x when it is non-zero. That is, it is non-zero for your x between negative 1, okay, and up to positive 2. So in that case, your f of x is defined to be x squared over 3 dx. Okay. Outside this limits, or outside this interval, that is for x greater than or equal to 2. Okay. And x less than or equal to negative 1. Okay. In this interval, your f of x is 0. So f of x is 0. For this interval, your f of x is 0. So ibig sabihin, yung integral, wala siyang iaambag dun sa integral na to. Okay, so we simply evaluate the integral on this interval. Okay, so evaluating this integral, we will have x of cube plus 1 over 3 plus 1. Okay, from x equals negative 1 up to x equals 2. So we will have x raised to 4, or ilabas na natin itong 1/4 dito, no? Tama ba? Mali pala ako. This is 2 plus 1 pala. This is 2 plus 1 over 2 plus 1, tapos yung nasa baba nito should be 2 plus 1. Tapos meron siyang 1/3 which we have taken out prior to integration. Okay? So you have now 1/3 you now have 1/3 times 1/3. So you have 1/9. Okay? We now have 1/9. Lalabas natin yung 1/9 na yan. Okay? Of x cubed. Okay? For x equals negative 1 at saka x equals 2. Okay? Which gives us 1 over 9 times 2 cubed, okay, minus negative 1 cubed, or this is 1/9 times this is 8, okay, minus this is negative 1 cubed is negative 1. So this is negative 1 here. Okay. So this is 8 minus negative 1 is 9 times 1/9. So this is equal to 1. Okay. So therefore, the second requirement of definition 3.6 is complied with. Okay. Again, yung first requirement na pag-usapan natin kanina, pero formally suit natin. first requirement of definition 3.6, which is your f of x should be greater than or equal to 0. Okay? For all x belonging to the set of real numbers. Okay? For the interval -1 to 2. Okay? We observe that your f of x is positive or 0. Okay? It's positive or 0. So therefore, the first requirement, okay, the first requirement of definition 3.6 is complied with. Okay? Now, if you are able to comply with the requirements of with the first two requirements of definition 3.6, then our conclusion is that f of x is a PDF, okay, of a continuous random variable. Okay, so yan. So that answers letter A. Okay. Now, for the second question, we are asked to find the probability that your x assumes a value that is greater than 0 and less than or equal to 1. Okay? So, another way of actually verifying whether your given PDF, okay, is a PDF, okay, is by graphing it. Okay? So dito, gumamit ako ng Desmos, okay, which you can access through desmos.com. Okay? And then piliin niyo lang yung graphing calculator. Okay. Then how do you graph how do you graph the given f of x? So the given f of x is x squared over 3 for x greater than -1 and less than 2, and 0 siya otherwise. Okay? So this is how you graph it in Desmos. So ito yung interface. Okay, this is the interface. You pull this up. Okay? You pull this up. Type nyo yung equation dito. Okay? So dito nyo ita-type yung equation. So this is the equation that you would type. Okay? Yan yung ita-type nyo dun sa dito sa ating equation dito. Okay? So how do you interpret that equation? Okay? How do you interpret that equation? So here you open this with curly brackets. Okay? You open this with curly brackets. You open and close f of x with curly brackets. So ito. So curly brackets. And then specify natin yung isang interval. Okay? Then colon. Okay? Colon. Then yung value of f of x at that interval. Okay? Then comma. Okay? Another interval. Okay? In this case, ito madaling interpret ito. This is x greater than -1 tsaka less than 2. So ito yun. So in that case, the value of your f of x is computed to be x raised to, but 2/3 to. Okay? Wait lang. Okay, so mali yung equation na na-type ko kanina. Pero still, the idea of how to type equations such as this one into Desmos, okay, is this. So interval, okay. So i-define niyo yung interval. Tapos colon, okay. Tapos yung value ng f of x. Okay? the expression that computes the f of x. Then comma, then specify another interval. Okay, specify another interval. Okay, colon, then an expression representing the value of x. Okay, then another comma. Okay, interval, colon, expression that specifies or that computes the value of x. Okay, so in this case, yung interval natin na to, yung for x greater than -1 and less than 2. Okay, that's the interval that we will first define. Then colon, okay, then ano yung value or the expression that computes for the value of f of x at this interval. Okay, so ayan, so x squared over 3. Okay, so mali yung na-type ko kanina. Then colon, comma. Okay, now let's work on this otherwise. Itong otherwise nyo kasi, it's either ano siya, yung x nyo greater than or equal to 2. Okay, ito yung nasa labas ito. Okay, and yung x nyo is less than or equal to -1. Ito yung nasa kaliwa nito. Okay, so in that case, or in those in those intervals, the value of your f of x is 0. Okay, so yung expression natin for that is 0 and 0. Okay, so by the way, if you have questions on how to type things on Desmos, please seek help kung kailangan niyo. Okay, pero halimbawa ito, that is na-type ito by having x caret square, okay, then space, okay, para or not space but use arrow button, okay, like sige, demo natin. That's x caret, okay, so automatic mag-exponentiate na yan, and square, okay, then yung right arrow ninyo para bumaba yung arrow, then /3, so para mag-fraction siya, okay, then comma, okay, so yung isang interval natin is x greater than equal to, so tinype ko lang greater than tsaka equal to, magkasunod. Okay, so itong greater than, okay, then equal to, okay, then 0, okay, colon, ang value ng f of x natin doon is 0, again, another comma, x less than equal to, again, succession, less than equal to, in succession, -1, colon, 0 siya. Okay, so you would have the following graph for your f of x. So from there, mabe-verify nyo na your f of x is always positive. Okay, so it's either 0 siya, ito, sa mga regions na to na yung f of x nyo is 0. Okay, here 0 din siya. Okay, but in all other intervals, okay, dito sa interval na to, okay, especially sa interval na your x is greater than -1, ito, okay, and less than 2, okay, your f of x is mostly positive. So therefore, that supports your observation, okay, that supports your observation that f of x, okay, complies with the first requirements of definition 3.6. Okay, and of course, para sa second requirement, we will need to do the integration. Okay, now we will now attempt to find the probability, what is the probability that your x would assume a value that is greater than 0, okay, and less than or equal to 1. Okay, so pagka ganun, pag hinahanap natin yung probability of your x assuming a value that is greater than 0 and less than equal to 1. Again, it doesn't matter. Mamaya, papaliwanag ko. Okay, so here, okay, yung probability na yon, okay, that probability is this actually. Okay, so natin to. From this point, okay, up to this point, okay, so yung boundary na to, that boundary, okay, and then this, tapos yung f of x nyo. Yan. So this area, okay, this area represents, okay, this orange shaded area represents the probability, okay, that your continuous random variable x would assume a value that is greater than 0 and less than or equal to 1. Okay? But again, sa napag-usapan natin kanina, this probability is still equal to the probability of your random variable x assuming values greater than 0 and less than 1. So it doesn't matter kung kasama yung 1, okay, if 1 is included or not, or the endpoints are included or not. Okay? So how do we find this area? Okay. So that area, okay, that area is computed to be the integral of f of x dx, okay, from 0 to 1. Okay? So that's how we compute that area. Okay? And again, in this interval, okay, from 0 to 1, okay, we know that your f of x is this. Okay? Or the value of your f of x is computed to be this one. Okay? Or computes to this expression. Okay? So therefore, the integral of x squared over 3 dx, okay, from 0 to 1, okay, labas natin yung 1/3. Okay? So that becomes the 1/3 times the integral of x squared dx from 0 to 1. Okay? This integral, okay, is x cubed, okay, over 3, okay, times 1/3, yung 1/3 kanina, okay, with x equal to 0 and x equals to 1. Equal to 1. Okay? Equals 1. Okay. So ngayon, yung 1/3 dito, sa loob nitong definite integral natin, labas na natin. Okay, so this becomes 1/9. Okay? So times, this is now 1, substitute natin yung upper limit. So 1 cube, okay, minus 0 cube. Okay? So 1 cube is 1, 0 cube is 0. So 1 minus 0 is 1. So this gives, this evaluates now to 1/9. Okay? So we say that the probability that your random variable x assumes a value that is greater than 0 and less than or equal to 1, okay, to be equal to 1/9. Yeah. That's the probability of that. Okay? So ito yung nakuha natin. Okay. Now let's move to cumulative distribution for continuous or for PDFs. Okay. So the cumulative distribution function f of x of a continuous random variable is similar to the definition for the cumulative distribution function, okay, for discrete random variable. It's actually the probability, okay, that f of x is actually the probability of your x assuming a value that is less than or equal to x. Okay? But this time, since continuous yung ating function, okay, we will have to integrate instead of sum up yung ating f of x. So we will have to integrate it from negative infinity up to x. Okay? So ibig sabihin, ang gagawin natin dito, or supposedly, ang gagawin natin dito is that to compute for the probability of your x assuming a value that is less than or equal to x, okay, we will have to integrate f of t, okay, we will have to evaluate f of t for varying values of x. Okay? So, mamimili tayo ng mga intervals, okay, for which we will define your cumulative distribution function. Okay, and then i-add natin yung area under the curve, okay, so that we will find the probability, okay, of your x assuming a value that is less than that value. Okay? So, say for example, example lang, no? Yan. So, example, that's your f of x. This is your f of x. Okay? So, we will have to compute itong area na to. Okay? So, that is the area, okay, from x, or from negative infinity up to x. Okay? So, that represents now the probability that your random variable x would assume, okay, a value that is less than x. Okay? Which is now equal to the integral of your f of t, okay, f of t, magkapalit tayo ng variable, dt, from negative infinity up to x. Okay? Now, pwedeng i-adjust yan. Say, let's call this x1. Okay, so x1 to. I-adjust natin yan to find the second interval for your cumulative distribution function. Okay, so let's have this one. Say dito, yung area na yun. Okay, so we will have x2. Okay. So now, we can actually find, okay, the probability that your x assumes a value that is less than x2. Okay. So ito yun. Yung colored ng violet lahat. Okay. So that is the integral of your f of t, dt, from negative infinity up to x2. Okay? But, pwede nyo tingnan mabuti. Okay? Pwede nyo tingnan mabuti that this is actually equal to yung probability that your x is less than equal to x1. Okay? Plus ito. Okay? Plus yung probability that your x is greater than equal to x1 or greater than x1. Okay, greater than x1 and say less than equal to x2. Okay? So, in terms of integrals, okay, so this is the integral of f of t, f of t dt from negative infinity up to x1. Okay? Plus, okay, the integral of f of t dt from x1 to x2. So, idadagdag na lang natin itong area na to dun sa previous na area. Okay? Para makuha natin yung second interval or second probability nung probability distribution function nyo. Okay? So, that's how the process would go. Okay? Supposedly. Okay? But here, it would be useful, okay, later on sa evaluation ng natin, that it would be useful to know that the probability, okay, of your x assuming values greater than a and less than b, okay, is equal to the value of your cumulative distribution function at b minus the value of your cumulative distribution function at a. Okay? And that the derivative, okay, the derivative of your cumulative distribution function is your probability distribution function or probability density function. So, the idea is ito, sinasabi nito is that the derivative of cumulative distribution function, okay, is the PDF. Okay? So, let's try it on this example. So, for the density function of example 3.11, so, this is example 3.11. So, ito yung ating function. Okay, again, we'll write it here. Okay? So, we'll write the cumulative distribution function here. So, I mean the PDF here. So, f of x equals x squared over 3 for x greater than -1 and less than 2. Okay? And 0 otherwise. Okay? So, first, we can so first, since hindi natin pwedeng i-table ito, okay? Katulad nung sa discrete probability distribution, okay? Wala tayong magiging masyadong guide in terms of or we will not be able to use that table as a guide in order to compute yung mga f of x, okay? But here's the thing. Let's simply inspect, okay? Let's simply inspect this interval, okay? And observe na itong interval na to would be divided or divides the entire x interval or the entire x-axis into 3 intervals. Okay? That is your x is less than -1. Okay, tingnan niyo to ha. Actually, you can also refer to the graph here. Okay? So yung interval that is less than -1 or x is less than -1. Okay? When x is -1, when x is greater than -1 and less than +2. Okay? And when x is greater than and equal to 2. So ito yung mga intervals na 'yon. Okay, so x is less than pwedeng less than equal to -1. Okay? So these are the 3 intervals. Okay? Now, having defined those intervals, we will use those intervals to define now your f of your cumulative distribution function. Okay? So i-define natin ngayon si si f of si cumulative distribution function ninyo, cumulative distribution function f of x ninyo, okay, into 3 intervals. Okay? That is when x is less than equal to -1, when or pwedeng wala tong -1 at equal na to. Anyway, pwede nyo namang pagbalik-baliktad yung equal na yan. Endpoints doesn't matter here. Okay? You have -1, x, your x is greater than equal to -1 and less than 2. Okay? Masyado maliit. That is -1. Your x is greater than or equal to -1. Okay? And less than 2. Okay? And when your x is greater than equal to 2. Okay? So, ayun. Now, as you can see, since yung f of x nyo, prior to x of -1, okay, prior to x of -1, yung f of x nyo, 0 pa yung value niya. Okay? Because that was under 0 otherwise, 0 otherwise interval. Okay? So therefore, when your x is greater than or equal to -1, okay, this should or your cumulative distribution function should equal 0. Okay? So that is when your x is less than equal to less than -1. Now, for your x greater than or equal to for x greater than equal to 2. Sorry. For x greater than equal to -1 and less than 2. Okay? We will now use yung definition ng PDF. Okay? So that is, we will now compute, ito, yung f of x ito, is now equal to the probability, okay, that your x is less than 2. Okay? And that is equal to the integral, okay, of your f of t dt, okay, from negative infinity up to x. Okay? So, yung x natin dito, yung 2 dito. Okay? So, ayun. So, let's have this to be as x muna para mas malinaw. Okay? So, your random variable x assumes a value of x that is less than x. Okay? So, now, at the interval of from negative 1 up to x, okay, your f of t, okay, is t square over 3 dt. Bali yung f of x natin, nagpalit lang tayo ng variable. Ginawa natin, instead of f of x ang isa-substitute natin, we will substitute f of t. Okay? And now, that interval, okay, would be from, or the lower and upper limits of your interval is from negative 1 up to x. Because remember, from negative infinity hanggang bago mag-negative 1, yung value ng function nyo is 0. So, wala siyang iaambag dun sa integral natin. So, magkakaroon lang ng ambag sa integral natin yung interval from negative 1, okay, up to x. Okay? So, in this case, we will have to evaluate this to be 1/3, okay, times this is t cube over 3. Okay? For t equals negative 1 up to t equals x. Okay? And again, yung 3 dito, or yung 1/3 dito, pwede kong ilabas, making this to be 1/9. Okay? Then, substitute natin yung upper at saka lower limit. Okay? So, this becomes x cube, yung upper limit. Tapos, yung lower limit natin, minus negative 1 cube. Okay? Or simplifying this is x cube. Negative 1 cube is negative 1. So, this is x cube plus 1. Okay? So, this is 1/9 times x cube plus 1. So, that would be the probability of your random variable assuming a value that is less than x. Okay? And that would happen on this interval. Okay? So, lagyan natin siya, x cube plus 1 times 1/9. Okay. Now, if your f of x gives you an interval that is non-zero for another kumbaga parang kapag yung f of x nyo allows you for another interval, okay, of non-zero f of x, of non-zero yung f of x niyo, you would have to evaluate or you would have in addition have to evaluate this, okay, from the next interval na ma-define niyo. Okay? So take note na yung limits, okay, yung limits na ginamit natin, the lower limit is this, okay, and the upper limit is x. Okay? So ganoon din yung gagawin sa susunod na interval. Okay? Say just as an example. Say meron pa akong isang interval dito like 2 tapos 3. Tapos meron akong 3 greater than equal to 3. Okay? Pag in-evaluate niyo yung f of x, yung cumulative distribution function for this interval. Okay? The limits that you would use at this point is yung 2, yung lower limit. Okay? Tapos x yung upper limit. Okay? So, yung magiging sagot dito sa f of x would now be equal to the expression to which this integral evaluates to. Okay? So, ayun. Now, Okay, now actually, since your f of x, okay, your distribution function is basically uh, non-zero only in this interval. Okay? Sa labas ng interval na yan, yung cumulative distribution function na nyo is basically 1 na. Okay? So, essentially kasi, you would have to add this 1 9 plus x cubed plus 1. Okay? And then you would have to evaluate the integral from 2 to infinity. Okay? Which in that case, 0 kasi siya. Okay? So, kung idadagdag nyo yung kung idadagdag nyo yung probability that your x would assume a value that is less than or equal to 2 na. Okay? Then, yun na nga, magiging 1 na yung probability niya. Okay? Anyway, the key here is that you identify these intervals first. Okay? So, itong interval na to is coincident or coincident with the interval of your f of x. Ito naman yung mga nasa labas kasi niya. Ito, tsaka to. Okay? So, yung mga nasa labas niya, it's either 0 yung magiging cumulative frequency distribution niya or magiging 1 kung nasa dulo na siya. Nasa dulong taas na siya. Okay? So, there. Now, you can actually use the cumulative distribution function. Okay, you can use the cumulative distribution function, f of x, to compute for probabilities din of certain range. Okay, so remember that this one is f of 0. Okay, this is f of 1. Okay, and this is f of 2. Okay? So, yung bawat interval nila is each interval is assigned as a value for your cumulative distribution function. Okay? So, if you're looking for the probability of your x assuming a value from 0 hanggang 1. Okay? Just like what we did on an earlier example. Okay? We simply have to find the probability. Okay? Find the probability that your x would be greater than 0. Okay? Your probability that your x would be less than 0, okay, plus yung probability that your x is less than 1. Okay, so that's the probability that we are looking for. And in this case, itong probability of your x greater than less than 0, by definition of your cumulative distribution function, okay, is f of 0. Okay, so this is sorry ulit, mali. mali. The probability that your x assumes a value that's greater than 0 and less than 1, okay, is the probability that your x is greater than or equal to 1, okay, minus, okay, the probability that your x is greater than or equal to 0. Okay, simply dahil yan dito dun sa graph niya. Okay? So recall na yung graph natin is something like pa ganito tapos pa ganyan. Okay? Sorry, hindi pala ganyan. Ito pala yung mali kanina. Pa ganito pala. Okay? So this marks your x as 0 and then this marks as your x equals 1. Okay? So the probability that your x is less than or equal to 1 is this entire thing. Okay? So itong buong area na to, yung probability, okay, that your okay, that your x would assume a value that is less than or equal to 1. Okay? So ito yung probability that your x is less than equal to 1. Okay? While so same curve. Okay? The probability that your x is less than equal to 0 is represented by this curve, by this shaded area. Okay? So since ang gusto nyo is again, hindi natin. Okay? This is 0 and this is 1. Since ang gusto nyo, what we want is the probability, okay, that your x would assume a value that is greater than 0 and less than 1. Ito yung gusto nating area. Okay? So this is the probability that your x would be greater than 0 and less than 1. Okay? So obviously, for us to be able to find this area, okay, we need to subtract this area from this. Okay, tanggalin natin tong area na to dun sa area na to. Okay, so that is, this area should be subtracted by this area. Okay, and by definition ng cumulative probability distribution, this is defined to be f of 1, while this is defined to be f of 0. Okay, so in our case, f of 1 is this one. So yun yung 1/9 times x cubed plus 1. While ang f of 0 natin is 0. Okay? So that is your x the probability that your x is between 0 and 1 is this one. Okay? Okay, so forget this thing, no? Sorry medyo marami tayong errors dito na. Pero please forget this thing. Okay, these are not correct. Okay, we don't assign this to be f0, f1, f of 1, f of 0, f of 1, and f of 2. We don't do that. Okay, but what we actually do here, okay, is that we will use the definition that the probability of your x, assuming values from 0 to 1, okay, would be f of 1, okay, minus f of 0. Okay, and again, consistent with the definition of your cumulative probability distribution. Ito nga yun. That's the probability that your x is less than equal to 1, and f of 0 is the probability that your x is less than or equal to 0. But how do we evaluate this this f of 1 at saka f of 0? Okay, so we simply look for this range, okay, and hanapin natin siya, okay, dun sa f of x natin. So we find this range, okay, here. Okay, we find this range within this interval. So therefore, yung f natin dito is f of 1 natin dito is this one, okay, evaluated when x is equal to 1. So that is 1 over 9 times x cubed plus 1 when x is equal to 1. Okay? While yung f of 0 natin, ganoon din. Okay? So f of 0 natin is 1 over 9 times x cubed plus 1 when x equals 0. Okay? So evaluating this, we will have 1/9 times 1 cubed plus 1 is 2. So this is 2. Okay? Minus 1/9 times 0 cubed plus 1. Okay? 0 cubed is 0 plus 1. So that's 1. Okay? So 2 times 1/9 is 2 nines minus 1 times 1/9 is 1 9. So therefore, the probability that your x is greater than 0 and less than 1 is 2 ninths minus 1 ninths, okay, equals 1 over 9. The same thing na nakuha natin in an earlier example. Okay? So,